An ethics class at Lebanon Valley College this semester, and I taught it last semester, and I'm going to teach it in the future. And one of my favorite topics to preach is, or to teach, I should say, is about selves and shadows, using the work of philosopher Mary Midgley. And she delves into the topic of evil and Jung's concept of the shadow self and the story of Jekyll and Hyde. And she says that the goal is not to destroy the shadow or the enemy, but to embrace it. My students really get into this particular section because there's all these cultural references to the shadow. Think about Frodo and Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. We were just talking about that downstairs. Think about Spider-Man and Venom. Yeah. Think about Noah and Tubal-Cain in the movie Noah. And think about Khan and Starfleet in the Star Trek movies, especially Into Darkness. Not to mention the great biblical stories of the shadow, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob wrestling with that mysterious figure by the river Jabbok. Jesus said, "Love your enemy. Do not make a shadow of the unholy other, but embrace it in order to become whole." When we fail to recognize our own capacity for evil, when we try to ignore it or cover it up or hide it away, it splits us and we become disintegrated. It happens with race, when we split people who are of a different skin color. With sexuality, when we split people who we think are of a deviant sexual orientation, or even a sexual orientation that's different from our own. It happens with tribes who split from others and call the other evil. It happens in politics all the time. Yesterday, a pastor friend of mine reminded me of the concept of fractals, patterns that repeat themselves in nature. And he shared with me an online article called The Fractal Mystery by an ELCA pastor named Michael Coffey, who writes, "As we plunge ourselves into Jesus' story of his life and suffering and his death and resurrection, it occurs to me that the paschal mystery of Christ is also a fractal mystery. Fractals, as you may know, are the repeating patterns of the whole, a shape and characteristic of the small. Think of a tree. A tree is a fractal. The shape of the whole tree, its trunk and its branches, is repeated in the root system below, in the larger branches, and the smaller branches, and even the twigs and the leaves. They all reflect the pattern repeated throughout the tree. Each small part tells you what the whole looks like, and the whole is a great version of the part." That's what we have in our readings tonight. It is a fractal pattern of God's saving history with God's people. It's a pattern of God loving creation into being, humanity willfully turning away, and God continually reaching out and trying to bring humanity back into an integrated whole. There is the self and the shadow self pushing away, and God bringing it back, this pattern over and over again. But Coffey writes, "The fractal mystery is that God enacted in Jesus an even larger pattern, the shape of truly human life, blessed it, suffered in it, transformed it into newness beyond our comprehension so that it can be our own lived, incarnate love. I keep coming back to the fractals of crystals and the movie The Dark Crystal. Anybody ever see The Dark Crystal? It's a story, it's a fantasy story that takes place on another world. It was created by Jim Henson. And in the story there is a giant magic crystal. And crystals are fractal patterns repeated. Well, this crystal is cracked, and two new races appear. The malevolent Skeksis, who use the power of the dark crystal to continually replenish themselves and extend their tyrannical rule over the whole world. The other race is the kind wizards called mystics. They are gentle and peace-loving, and they do what they can to protect the weak. In the story, the three sons of the planet are starting to align, and the leader of the mystics sends his young disciple named Jen to find the crystal shard, the broken piece of the crystal, and to restore it to the dark crystal before it's too late, and the Skeksis remain in power forever. I won't spoil the ending for you, but suffice to say that the goal is not to destroy the Skeksis, but to bring wholeness, to bring the Skeksis and the mystics together again, to bring darkness and light, the shadow and the self together again, redeeming both sides. That is what the cross of Christ does. The cross is like the crystal shard that Jesus inserts into the darkest places of despair and hopelessness. The goal is not the destruction of our enemies, but the redemption of them. Because what I fear and hate in the other is really what I fear and hate in myself. So the goal is the healing of the world and our families and ourselves. Last night, as I sat in darkness, as our youth led the service for Good Friday, I watched the candles being snuffed out one by one. And I remembered how Jesus' life repeated the fractal pattern of evil taking over, maneuvering him into a no-win situation. But I was reminded that it is into this impasse that the cross of Christ is inserted. The cross fills the chasm that cannot be traversed. The cross dissolves the despair that cannot be medicated away or wished away or kicked or thrown away. The cross is Christ's answer to temptation. And the cross cancels out the test that cannot be passed. So I felt reassured in the service last night as the lights came back up. But then I got on the internet and I saw the news, headlines of college massacres and murders of teenage girls, and the climate crisis drought in California, and the killing of Christians in the Middle East. I hate not having freedom in this world, knowing that there are zones of danger where the fractal patterns of evil are repeating themselves. Something needs to be crucified here. Not someone, something. Not people, but that shadow. It needs to be nailed to the cross so that Jesus can do with it what we cannot, which is bring it into the light, to bring it to accountability, to bring it out in the open so that it can be dealt with forthrightly and honestly, so that healing and wholeness can begin. This is your church, Jesus. Get to work on me, on this world, on the shadow. Bring another fractal pattern to bear. We are waiting in this vigil of Easter, and we are proclaiming your resurrection even before the light of dawn. Give us the faith, and the strength, and the courage, the creativity, and the vision to see this new fractal of faith appear. Amen.